She's a potty mouth.
Caca.
I'm gonna do a quick intro.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna loosen you up. I got a good one for you.
It's okay. I loosened up in the car. I have like a playlist for
Like hyping you up.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have one too, but I think there's only like 4 songs in there. And I'm like, I do get all like, I'm like, okay. There are like some where it's like I get really teary eyed where I'm doing this, you know?
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I was a big
I get
fuck up.
like all up in my head, and I'm like, you know what? I'm in my head. I need to get out of there.
Yeah.
And I'll put on. Today it was Freedom by John Batiste. And it's just like very New Orleans-y, joyful vibes. And I'm like, yeah, this is Lucy.
And you know what? Like, I feel like really the act of like moving, you know, and like just
I was moving in the car.
off.
Yeah, and then
you know.
someone parked next to me, and I was just like, yeah, that's right. You wish this was you, and it couldn't be you. Just put on the song and move.
And just move, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's like the whole thing for me too, where it's like, you know, sometimes you do have like a rough day and you're like, man, this is like a rough day. Or like something happens, right? And you're just like, man, that sucked. And like you could choose to stay in that like shitty like point, right? Where you're like, man, that freaking ruined my day. Or you could like literally shake it off. And then like you could be like, whoa. And then get back into it and then be like, all right. Because it's like, you know, it's like, why allow for there to be like so much control in like, you know, if we know that like life is one of those kind of things where it's like, hey, you never know what's going to happen next, you know? So might as well like live it in the now.
Yeah.
Live it in the now.
Live it
know?
in the now.
So I'm going to do a quick intro.
Okay, do it.
So I never know how to do these damn intros. So I'm always like, should I look at you? I'm Claudia from Skills Pay Bills, and I'm really excited to have one of my really good friends and fellow weirdo here on the podcast. She's smart, she's funny, she's creative, she's artistic, she's all the woman you need. No, but Gabby is such a, you know, I love you, Gabby, because you're just, you know, every time we hang out, you're just,
it's a great time.
It's a really good time, you know, and most of the time you just come to the studio and we just kind of like hang out, and it's like, you know, I was telling Manny yesterday, I was like, there's a few people in this world that like I could genuinely like, at least I feel I could be genuinely like just myself, you know, around, and that's him, and then you know, and like there isn't a lot of people in that list, right? And the reason why is like you give that like feeling of like you're not judging me for being fucking weird, or for, you know, because it's like a lot of people like sometimes, you know, you do something weird and they're like cringe, you know, and you're just kind of like, you know, and so it does feel good to basically be your authentic self around someone that like, you know, isn't like constantly like judging you, you know, which is nice. So that's why I was like, dude, I feel like there's always like some kind of conversation that we're having, or some kind of like, you know, we stumble upon a lot of like life things, you know, and I know we've had a lot of deep conversations about just stuff, and, you know, and I think that we are almost like in similar kinds of like places in our lives, you know, maybe it's professionally or like it as like just personally for me personally, you know, I think that within like the last, you know, like few months, like I've kind of been like, who am I outside of like being like so loca and sewing, you know, and I have like this obsession with sewing, but it's like what I have to be able to like have, you know, like I want to be able to
Who's
like,
Claudia?
yeah, exactly. And like, I don't think like I've ever really like went into that direction of like who is that person, you know, because it's like I know who I am as far as like being like, you know, where I sew and do all that kind of stuff, but it's like you know, I want to be like a multi-dimensional like person, and I don't feel like I'm that, you know. So it's like I know, like, I remember a lot of our conversations that we've had, and you know, where we talked about, like, you know, you're kind of like going through this explorational phase, you know, and what that looks like. And so for me, like, I remember a lot of like people's conversations and things like that, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And he's like, how could you remember all that stuff? And I'm like, I remember everything. But it's like, I'm like, I could read your mind right now. He's like, whoa.
Like,
I know. He's like, what? But I admire that about you, you know, that you're willing to have that exploration phase, you know, where you're kind of like, what do I want to do? And like, ooh, that sounds like fun, and like leaning into that, as opposed to like, I feel like that there is a certain time that we kind of like just stop wanting to like explore, you know, and like exploring in like the way of like finding identity, but also like, you know, finding personal identity, but also finding identity in like an art practice, you know? So those were like one of the reasons why I was like, oh shit, like I admire you a lot for like this journey, you know? So it's like, for me, like being able to find inspiration within like real people, you know, that like, I'm like, wow, they're actually like going through it. And like, how do you get into like their minds to like be able to cope with those changes, you know? And so that's where I was like, whoa, like I think it would be an awesome conversation to be able to have with someone about like how they're getting to, you know, become themselves, but also like how are you, what's the journey of like finding yourself, but also like finding like your purpose in like your art journey, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, first that was very nice intro. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm like, don't cry. No, but first I just wanted to say, I feel very lucky to know that I've been able to be someone that you can be yourself with. I think that is the type of relationship that I value most, when someone feels that they can be authentic with me.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I'm not really about like touch and go friendship and, you know, how do you say, like acquaintances.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm not offended by it. Yeah. But for me, when it comes to people, I want to know who you are on a deep level. I want to connect deeply. It's like small talk, I'm like, I mean, I'll do it because I have to. But that deeper connection of knowing someone and seeing someone is what I'm all about. So thank you for sharing yourself with me. I really cherish that. So thank you.
I think it was like one of the first times that you came into the studio and were like, hey, you want to make a video? And you're like, and so it's like, it's always funny because it's like, you know, you're kind of like, it's hard to make a video in front of like someone, because then they're like, oh shit, it took you like 5-10 different tries to do it. And so then and you really have to, you know, be like so repetitive, you know, that you could kind of be like, this bitch fucking is acting. But then it's like, you're trying to like almost like deliver a message within like creating a video, and like not just wanting to like, you know, but also like having like a vision and like being able to execute that vision, because, you know, that's the purpose of it, right? And so anytime you have like someone or it's like, you know, someone new that you're like, would you, and then they're like, hey, sure, you know. And so it's like, it's cool to then like look back and be like, oh, that person was like involved in that, and like, you know. And I think it's also like really cool because then it's kind of like seeing like someone's workshop, right? Like it's their literal workshop, but it's like, then you get to see like the behind the scenes of like their process of like creating something. So then you're like, oh damn, that was like,
oh, so that was like the 50th take.
Exactly.
The 5th. Cool. No, totally.
You know, so then I was like, oh cool. But it's like, I felt like that was like one of those times where I was like, oh damn, like she saw all the weird, and she was okay with it.
And she was like hyping the weirdness, like make it weirder.
Yeah. And so for me, I was like, I love that, because it's like a lot of the times, like, I get a lot of people where they're like, I love watching your videos, and I forget that, like, I kind of have to like get myself out of like the whole thing of like, because it's like Manny is like my partner, my life partner, and so then I'm like, oh shit, like I could be as comfortable with him as I want, because it's like we've known each other for more than 15 years. So it's like then you're just kind of like, fuck yeah, like we get to be weird, and he understands like how picky I am and how weird I am and all that kind of stuff. And so when we're actually like making a video, I'm like standing in front of like my freaking life partner, so that it's like you're super
Your soul
comfortable.
is naked, girl.
Exactly. And you're like, he's, you could be as like open and, and then you remember, you're like, oh shit, like that's going to be a video for everyone else to see. And so, and then you're like, okay, just don't think about that. And then people,
but it's beautiful because then you're, I don't know. I think it's really nice to see that authentic side and that goofiness that I know because of our relationship. But I don't know, like if I didn't know you and I saw, like some of your shots of like you wearing your clothes, I'm like, oh man, she's intense, man, and but then like I know you and I'm like, that's really funny that she like,
I know, right?
was posing and super serious looking.
Yeah.
And but then you see the videos like in your stories and whatnot, and you're just like, hey, and then you just can't even take yourself seriously, so you're cracking up, and it's just a whole new layer of you. And it just, at least for me, it adds this like, okay, I kind of get who's making this stuff, and it almost starts making your work make even more sense of them. Like you have like your Charlie Brown or the patchwork quilts on the jackets, and you're like, how did this happen? And then you see a video and you're like, okay, I kind of get it a little bit more now. I kind of get a little more. No, it's great. I love that.
So it was like one of those things where I was like, oh shit, like she understands it. She understands the weird. And that's where it's like, it's awesome, right? Because you're able to like go into like a space and like not feel like just kind of like, and like this person's gonna like, so in that way I was like, dude, I would love to have a conversation with Gabby, because it's like you're like in an exploration phase of like just doing all kinds of really cool things. And I wanted to say this before I forget, because I might forget.
It's all good.
So the jacket that we have at the airport, you contributed to that jacket. And so I know you do a lot of stuff. Like I know you've explored a lot of stuff, and I really want for you to talk about like all your art practices, and like how you got there. But the jacket, you made a lot of tiny little like sequins out of clay. And so for me, like, getting to like sew each one of those in there, and then you made like buttons and all these other like fun shapes out of like clay, and I was like, whoa, this is like so cool. And like, so if you see the jacket, it's at the airport. And Gabby, yeah. And so
I still gotta go see it.
I know. Date. It's like a coffee route. You're like, oh, there
because
you
there's
are.
a lot of art there, and it's good art. So.
Dude, it's so funny because it's like I was like even thinking like, what are your plans for today? And you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go look at art. And you're like, where? You're like, the airport. They're like, what? You're like,
have a flight? No.
I know. They're like, actually, it turns into a San Diego tourist reel. You're like, actually, there's art all over the San Diego airport.
Yeah, it's like an art crawl, but through the airport.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Hey, that is a good idea. Yeah. Like,
write that down.
Yeah. There's a lot of really cool like art before you even get into like the TSA like check and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff that I was like, whoa, I never, there's like somewhere you're like, whoa, that looks super, super cool. And then you're also getting to know like the artists and, and so just that whole experience, like meeting new artists and like, now following them and like seeing like how their art practice and all that kind of stuff, you're just kind of like really inspired and blown away by like, wow, like this is such a cool way of like expressing yourself, but also just what a beautiful life.
Yeah, and getting to know our community, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some artists that I didn't know were in San Diego.
Exactly.
Until I had a flight. I know I had some time before we boarded. And I was like, oh, what's that over there on the wall? You know, so I feel you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, tell me about your art practices.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I'll give you a little bit of background.
Please.
Because I think it's important for my journey. So, sorry, I'm stepping
okay.
on stuff.
It's okay.
So kind of going back to when I was in university the first time, like 10, 15 years ago, something like that. I had studied computer science, which was an accident. And I ended up going to work in Seattle, Washington, to work on video games of all things, because I didn't grow up playing video games, so it was just weird that I ended up there. And then, but I always knew that I didn't belong in that space. It was very corporate, even though in like the game side of tech, you're not in deep corporate. Like people have like tattoos and purple mohawks and like they're saying all sorts of bad words in like official meetings and stuff. So it's like where all the weirdos go that work in tech, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So in that way, it was cool because I was more relaxed, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have to wear like, corporate clothes or anything like that, but it still didn't feel like a place where I was going to be for a long time. Ended up being there for 7.5 years though.
Whoa.
So it was longer than I planned. But part of that reason was because I thought I wanted to be a teacher, like a high school teacher. And then I tried doing that through volunteering after a few years. And I was like, you know what? I did a lot of tutoring and like computer science research and all this stuff before while I was in school.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the right path for me anymore, because this other journey into video game production and video game console production opened up a whole new world for me. Oh, you can live a creative life, and there's lots of different paths and ways that you can make that, tailor it basically to yourself. And so I was like, I don't think I can go back to a job like a high school teacher who has to punch in at a certain time, punch out at another time, and be underpaid and unappreciated, frankly. And so I started exploring, what do I want to do instead then? Because I didn't want to leave because I didn't enjoy working there. I wanted to leave because I was going towards something. Like not running away, running towards. And I think for me, it's paid off in multiple ways, because it forced myself to go through this period of discernment and trying some stuff to decide what I didn't want to do more so than what I did. But also it helped me to save more money so that I could do what I'm doing now. So fast forward to January of 2021, and I quit my job.
Wow.
It was kind of scary because I had pursued computer science for financial security, and I was leaving all of that security.
Dude, that is scary.
Bro, I miss that paycheck and that healthcare, I'll tell you what. But what I've gained since then has been a vocation, which I think is different from a career or a job, it's more on the cellular level. Where it fulfills so much more for me. And I'm still figuring it out. But on the art side, what I decided at that point, because I had the privilege to live off of savings, live with family, is I said, you know what, I'm just going to go start taking classes at City College and Mesa and all those. And I'm going to take whatever I want. And, within reason, I'm going to not worry about how much things cost, because art supplies are expensive.
They are expensive,
Especially like film, for example, when I did film photography. But part of the process of exploration is failure. And I don't think I was comfortable with that for a long time, but I knew that that was part of what I needed to do here, right?
Yeah.
And so I made sure that, you know, if I was looking at the price point of something, I started like stressing about it. I'm like, oh, I'm working off savings, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wait, we made a deal, self. We're not going to compromise here. So we're going to buy as much film as we need to make all of the mistakes and then learn from them, right?
Exactly.
And I don't know, as a person who's a perfectionist, that was really hard to let go. I still remember my first assignment for film photos. I had put in a fresh roll, the first roll, and I was like, man, like I just want all of these photos to be good so that there's something I can turn in that I will like. And so I started kind of having like the writer's block equivalent.
Yes.
And I said, no, I'm going into the writer's block spiral. I need to like get myself out of this and shake it off. And so what I did is I just turned on the camera, put it on some random setting, and I just like took a camera, like I didn't even look at what I was taking a photo of. I just took a random photo. And I was like, there, now it's not perfect. So let's get to work.
Whoa. You know? Yeah. And I feel like
it was so freeing.
Oh my God. That is like, I feel like there is a lot of people that they really get into their inside of their heads, and then they're like, oh my God, if it's not perfect, like we can't start. And it's like we have like a quote that we're constantly like repeating to ourselves, and I'm like, and Manny's like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You know, like start and you know, that will be the first documentation of like the process, right? And that picture will be like such a important part of the process of like letting go and like just starting, you know, because then you will have some kind of like process, you know, where you're like, wow, look at how much I've grown.
Yeah.
You know, that is like physical, where you're like, wow, look at how much I've grown, as opposed to like being so like afraid to basically be like where it's bad. We know that like anytime we start anything, like if I was a beginner at anything else other than sewing, I would be really shitty. Actually, I wouldn't, because I'm good at everything I do. I'm just kidding. But
it's all about the attitude, though.
know,
it's all about embracing.
I'm a fast learner.
That failure. No, I get you. I feel that way with a lot of things too. If I'm not good at it immediately, part of me is like, this isn't fun anymore, you know, or whatever. Like ceramics. Actually, that's kind of how I felt with ceramics when I started. So that's kind of one of my other things that I'm working on now. You know, I would say photography and ceramics are my main jams in the art scene. But the first 2.5, 3 months, my first semester doing ceramics, I was like, I fucking hate that shit.
Isn't it?
Like, it was
ceramics
so hard.
Is humbling.
I didn't know. Oh, definitely on many, many levels. I just didn't understand how the material worked, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, you've probably experienced this with thread like a million years ago when you started. Still. Yeah, because I guess there's different types of materials.
There is,
too. So maybe if you encounter something new, I don't know, like maybe leather where you punch a hole, that hole is there forever.
Exactly. For life.
For life. Yeah.
Yes.
But, you know, maybe like thread gets more bunchy if it's a certain material.
Exactly.
I don't know which one it would be. But anyways, so clay, I was like, I want to punch a baby in the face. I'm so mad right now.
The babies are like, what
did I do?
Yeah.
I know. Sorry. But yeah. And then something finally clicked for me. And I was like, I think I kind of get what's going on, sort of. And then I've been hooked since then.
I love it.
Like, right. But I think it's all about that attitude of accepting before. It's almost like setting expectations with someone, right? Yeah. But it's an art medium or a new experience, whatever it is, that you're going in and you're saying, look, I'm going to be not great at this. I'm going to be terrible at it. Yeah. But that's where it's interesting, you know? And I still remember some of my early pieces on the pottery wheel, where I would try to, you know, make something basic like a cylinder or like a bowl or whatever. And at some point I would lose control and it just would like spiral onto itself. But for me, that was actually more interesting than the thing I was trying to make, right? And I actually ended up keeping some of those pieces. I said, you know what, I'm going to keep some of these. And I like glazed them and fired them and all that. And then it reminded me of this book called Beautiful Oops.
That's cool.
It's like a kid's book
Yeah,
where
yeah.
like they're like, oh no, I spilled coffee or I spilled juice if you're a child,
Yeah.
I guess. And then they
Some
like
kids
paint
drink
around
coffee.
it. Yeah, that's wild. No, actually, you're not wrong. My best friend did have coffee when she was a child. Like, I don't know why,
You're
but
like,
it's a thing. Yeah. So coffee puts her to sleep instead of waking her up. I'm like, girl. But yeah, so like they would be like, okay, it's a splotch on the paper, and then they would like draw something around it, right?
Yeah.
And it's a shift in your perspective that says, okay, all right, I might not be able to make a bowl on the wheel right now. I can make this
Yes.
disaster. But what's interesting about this disaster?
Exactly.
How do I like if this is what I can do right now, what can I make with it? What is
Exactly.
interesting about this? What can this teach me? And what can I I guess form from it, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And honestly, one of those pieces is one of my favorite pieces I've ever made.
Dude, no, that's
So
it's such a beautiful metaphor for life too, right? Where it's like you're like, we sometimes think that like these mistakes could, you know, could hold like could create identities within us, you know, but it's like every day, like we're constantly like with these mistakes, how we respond and like perspective, right? Like perspective and like how you're seeing it, where you're like, oops, I made a mistake. How do we like fix it? And how are you coping with like these like things that are happening in life? It's such a beautiful like transition to like life, right? Where it's like in life we feel like the mistakes that we make, they're like, oh my God, they're like, this is like real life. Like you're not supposed to be making, you know, things like that. So it's like in like an art practice, it's like you're not just learning like this new skill that you're having, but it's like you're learning like how to be patient with yourself, right? And how to like approach it as like a beginner. Like, hey, you're gonna be new at this thing and you're gonna like suck for sure because you've never done it before, and that's fine. Like that's cool, you know. So it's like I feel like these kind of things are like they mesh so well with like living them in our like real life, and also like that like going into like, hey, I've never done this before, I'm gonna try it and like see what happens.
yeah.
You know, so that's like that's the beautiful thing about like making mistakes, you know, is that a lot of times it's like how you choose to like, I guess, handle them, you know, or how you choose to approach that situation, as opposed to being like, oh my God, I made a mistake and like now my life is over and what am I gonna like,
Yeah, or I suck.
and it's
Ceramics
like,
is not for me.
exactly. And it's like, hey, you know what, like we all like, we're not great at like everything that we do, you know. So it's like, how does it transition into like real life? Because it's like I feel like being able to cope with like certain things, it allows for you to be like become a stronger individual,
Build
you know.
resilience, yeah.
Exactly. So I feel like those are, you know, the conversations that we have is like where I'm like, whoa, like that's such a great way to like implement it into your life, where it's like, hey, the mistakes that we're making, they're not going to define us, they're going to allow for us to grow.
Yeah,
You
no,
know?
totally. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think part of my approach to my art practice is when I do get stuck, because I don't know what I want to do, I'm not feeling inspired, or again, that perfectionist block, I will sometimes deliberately do something that I know I'm not awesome at.
Yeah.
So, for example, I have a ukulele, a poor, neglected ukulele in my room that every once in a while, when I'm stuck, I will grab it off the wall, tune it up, and then I'll play these 4 chords that I know. And I'll play them, and I'll be like, oh, what were they again? Oh, yeah. And then I'll get that. And then, you know, for like 10, 15 minutes, just kind of playing it and remembering how hard that is for me.
Yeah.
And how much time it took me to just learn those 4 chords. And then I'm like, dang, okay, this is a great reminder, and this is why I do it. A great reminder that if I can produce this like pretty little melody with 4 chords,
Yeah.
in something that, you know, creating music, which is something I'm not naturally great at.
Yeah.
What can I do in something that I've been working my butt off to get better at, right?
Exactly.
And just kind of, it's almost like remembering that I do have some self-confidence somewhere in there.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But I completely agree with you that that attitude of accepting our humanity, you know, accepting that we are flawed, accepting that everything that we do in life we had to learn, you know, since we were babies. I mean, you would know more because I'm not a mom, but you know, I'm sure you can remember when you were watching Ice, you know, as a little baby, like learning how to like
every week
how to
was
eat,
new.
being like, whoa, I have fingers or whatever, right? And just everything was new. And I think that's okay, like, to do when you're older, you know, because I think one of the interesting things about life is that there is so much in this world that we can't possibly know everything, and we can't possibly be good at everything. Even if we, you know, lived 2 lifetimes, 3 lifetimes, whatever, right? And so being okay with that part of ourselves and being okay with persevering through that period of this is so hard, it gets you to an interesting place later.
Exactly.
And you know, artists do this kind of thing all the time. I remember in one of my beginning drawing classes, we had an exercise where you had to do something with your non-dominant hand, right? So I'm right-handed. But then you had to do like a portrait of someone with your right hand, and then they're like, okay, now do it with your left hand. You're like, what? You know, I can't do this. But you're like, I actually ended up liking weird. That one more than the other one. And I don't know, man, there's something beautiful and interesting to me, at least, within those imperfections. And I think that's what I love about film photography, about being not the best ceramicist, you know, and just, I don't know. I think I'm tired personally of the polished, clean, perfect stuff that I see in the world, you know, like digital photography or your like iPhone camera photo or whatever. And I think there's value in that. I'm not saying there isn't, but for me, I want to see the weird stuff. I want to produce weird stuff. I want to push the boundaries of what is interesting, I guess, or what is valuable and what my own perspective is. So like some of my photo series are deliberately blurry and warped. And you know, I can definitely see a past version of myself going to a gallery or a museum and being like, why are all of these photos blurry? These aren't even good. You know? But for me now, I'm like, oh, this kind of makes me think about that time when I learned about my grandfather and how he spent the first, 7, 8 years of his life with blurry vision, but he didn't even know. Whoa. Right? Because he didn't know about glasses and their existence. And one of his friends was like, hey man, try these on. And he tried them on and was like, oh my God, everything's so clear now. Like, is this how everyone else is experiencing the world? Like, look at all of the leaves. You can see each individual leaf. And his friend's like, yeah, bro, I think you need glasses, right? But, you know, I don't know. I find it interesting to think about what was life like? What were some of the challenges you faced, right?
Exactly.
And I think the beauty in shifting my perspective is that then I become more empathetic towards other people, right? Because then I think, okay, what are some like design considerations to make things more accessible to other people, right? Or and I don't even mean that just from like a disabilities perspective, but also from a life experiences perspective. That's why travel is so important to me, right? Because I am only going to live my own life, and the experiences that I give myself / that, you know, life presents to me, the opportunities that I get. But if I can go and, you know, walk in different places, meet different types of people who've had completely different experiences from me, I can then start to understand them and other people like them a bit more, right? And again, shifting that perspective of what is quote unquote normal for me is not normal for other people necessarily. So true. Right? So I don't know. I think that for me is the core of my art practice.
Yeah.
It's regaining self-knowledge, like learning who I actually am.
Exactly.
You know, because I built up this other persona who is still me, but it was like corporate me, corporate success me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, she has served me well, and the lessons I learned through her continue to help me now.
Yeah.
But then there's stuff that parts of myself that I let go of in order to succeed in that space.
Yeah.
And I'm getting to know that part of myself again, right? So there's that. And then there's also, who do I want to become? Who do I want to be as a person?
Yeah.
And what can I contribute to the world that comes from my most vulnerable and true self? You know?
I love that.
And for me, that's terrifying. I hate vulnerability, but my art practice is helping me become more comfortable with that.
That's awesome.
You know,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Yesterday, I was having this. I was at teaching a workshop at an embroidery workshop, and one of the ladies.
At Mesa, right?
Yeah. And I was like, one of the ladies, she was like, you know, I used to be part of like the sewing circle, and we used to like sew and this and that. And I was like, wow, that's so great. She's like, yeah, I used to live in New York. And I was like, wow, that's cool. And I was like, well, I guess you found your new sewing circle. And she's like, what? But I was like, dude, that's so awesome. And she's like, yeah, everyone else was better than me. Like, you know, like they were better artists. And I was just like listening to her, because I'm like, okay, like, you know. And then she's like, everyone was like, you know, more creative and more artistic than me. And, you know, but everyone was like so fascinated with what I was also doing, you know. And she's like, but they were like more, you know, their craft was like more advanced and this and that. And I was like, yeah. And, you know, I started to think about it, and I was like, you know what? I'm like, as like a person that has been doing this for a really, really long time, you know, since I was like 8, and you start to like, you know, for me, like, you know, seeing like my mom make our stuff, and then being like looking at it, and basically the comparing of like, that one's store-bought, this one my mom made, and you can tell, you know. And for me, like, there was like a point where I was like, wow, like almost like embarrassed. And someone even shared that with me yesterday too, like almost like embarrassed that
that you can tell,
and that like that my, like, I felt like I was like, wow, we're so poor that like my mom makes our stuff, you know. And I felt like really embarrassed by that, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, like striving in like my own like art practice to basically be like, how can I, everything that I do, how can I make it look like it was like store bought, you know? And so like striving for years and years and years, especially when I did custom sewing and tailoring, you know, because it's like, you know, most people don't know what it's supposed to look like. But it's like, for me, like I've always strived to like make sure that it looked like the most professional that it could look, right? And like, how could you like make it look more like flawless and like, you know, just polished, very like, you know. And so that was like always like my strive. And then, you know, as I started noticing that, like, why do you want to look like your shit was like store bought? Like, there's something so beautiful about going to like a thrift store, and this is more rare. It doesn't happen as often when you go into a thrift store and you actually find an item that was made by one person.
Yeah.
You know, like one person, because it's like most of our things, they're mass produced, so it's like it's going to be made by like a bunch of people in an assembly line,
machines,
you know. And so it's like, how do you find that like that gem of a fingerprint that is like, that you can tell like someone actually like made it
stitches. Yeah.
Exactly. You know. And so for me, like, you know, because for a really long time I was like, oh my God, you know. And like, you know, my mom, like, you know, maybe not having like the right tools or the right, you know,
making it work
to, you know. And she was like, hey, you know what, like I need to make sure that this shirt looks good, you know, and that they could wear it. And I remember there was a specific shirt that like I always think about when my mom she made us this shirt. And so near our house there was a like a Forever 21 or Fashion 21. I don't know which one of those it was, but there was one of those. And I just, she would take us there. It was like walking distance. So we would go and we would walk there. And like, you know, I worked, you know, I was like a young girl. I think I was like before I moved to the house that they currently live at now. So that was like before I was 12. So we would go there and, you know, I would work. I would put on yard sales and like I had like, I was good at saving money, you know? And so I've always had my finances in check.
Have to get some pro tips.
Right. Then. Yeah. And so she would take us and we would like look around and be like, wow, look at all this like fashionable stuff, you know? And so there was like a shirt and I was like, wow, like that was like, it was such a beautiful shirt. It was like, satin, and so it was like white satin and it was like glossy, but it was like stretchy and it was like very simple shirt. Like it was just kind of like you know, it had like the neck was a little low and it was just covered in like these beautiful butterflies. And my mom was like, pick something you like, and I was like, I like this, and my sister's like, I like that too, and she's like, all right, let's go. And we're like, you're buying it? And she's like, no. And then we went to downtown LA. She found the fabric and she made it. And I remember that she made this shirt, right? And I was just kind of like, my little judgmental ass was like, it doesn't look as good as the store. And because obviously she didn't have the proper tools to be able to like execute this,
plus being a preteen,
you know,
help.
Yeah, it doesn't help. And so there was like this technique that she did where she hand stitched the neck, you know. And so for me, like that always like haunted me and almost was like if it was like my project that I was like, how can I make this project better? Like, how can I like refine it? How can I like, you know, so it's like, that was like my goal is to like, how can I refine this? How can I make this like better, you know? And I really took that with me where I was like, you know, and for a really long time, like I spent like hours and hours and hours trying to refine something. And like, now I enjoy kind of that phase of like, you know what, like it's not going to be straight and like, that's okay. Yeah.
Embracing those
you know?
imperfections.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get that. Again, that's why I love like things like film photography. Yeah. Because there's so much that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And like you can get the right shot, but there was some dust on your lens or in your camera or on the negative or whatever. And then you're like, oh my God, you know, and there's like this like one thing and it's always like in a very conspicuous place, like someone's like face or whatever, right? But that's crazy. I'm just trying to, even in those moments where I'm like, this just happened like 2 days ago, so it's a little fresh.
Yeah.
But I try to embrace those moments because I don't know, I think with all of the mass-produced things out there, you know, clothes, photos, etc., we start to value this illusion, right?
Yeah.
These illusions of perfection and standards that we have decided collectively in some way that is, you know, the ultimate thing. And I think that, again, that aspect of humanity, that aspect of imperfection, that, I don't know, there's like a tangible texture almost that comes from a person actually being involved, and not just being involved because, you know, even in mass-produced things, people are involved, but a person taking the time to put themselves in their work. I think that's really what it is, and it's kind of hard to describe in the way that a soul is difficult to describe, because I can't tell you, here's the scientific proof of why this thing exists or whatever, right? But I do feel that when a person makes something themselves and they're putting themselves into it, there's something else. There's another layer to it, and I totally understand the pena that you felt as a child, like being like, oh my God, my mom made this, or, you know, I made this and it's not even that good. Like, you can tell, you know, and I think sometimes people use that as an insult too, right? Like I'm delving into the realm of making my own earrings with my ceramic stuff. And I don't know, it'll come up in conversation. I'll be like, oh yeah, I made these myself. And someone will be like, yeah, I can tell. And I'm like, I feel like you're trying to like be insulting almost, but compliment. Like I'm not sure what you're trying to say, but you know what? Like I'm proud of these because they're the first ones I made. And I love them, and yeah, they don't look like they're from the store, but I dig that.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And I think
there is something very beautiful.
It's magical when you make something, though, and it's magical when there's a surprise, right? Like again with the film, or like on the wheel when you're like, oh, I'm not great at this.
Responds.
What's gonna happen?
Yeah,
like how it responds. That's a great way of putting it, because you're in relationship, you're in conversation with the material, right?
Exactly.
And it's almost like you're trying to convince it, like, oh, we're gonna be a skirt, or I don't know, however this is how I imagine you're sewing. Like you're like, okay, we're gonna be this kind of jacket, and they're like, no, I'm not feeling it. Like I get what you're saying. I agree with half of this vision, but also, have you thought about this? And you're like, no, we're not gonna do that. But you have to dance, right? And you know, the more time you spend doing it, the more, you know, you kind of go and flow with it, right? But like certain materials are just not going to do things because that's not what they are.
Exactly.
Right? And you have to accept those parameters, right? Just like you're accepting, I'm not good at this, therefore this is another parameter that I need to take into account with how the result's going to be. But I don't know, that journey of being bad at something is something I'm really enjoying more now.
Yeah.
than before. I think.
No, you know what? It's so awesome because, you know, that whole part, right, where you're just kind of like, you're able to like see that like within those, like maybe they're imperfections or whatever, there is like a sense of like a human was like a part of that, you know, and that's like so beautiful, as opposed to like something where it's like it's so mass produced that it's like you're just kind of like, oh, okay, like it's another thing, and that's great, you know, but it's like there's something so beautiful about like having like a human touch where you're like, wow, someone actually like made this. And like it's not just how the materials respond, but how you also respond with it, right? Where it's like you're there and you're like how do you feel today? And like you could definitely be in that space of like, I feel like shit. You know, I feel like shit. I feel very blue. And it's like, and it's so dark, and it's so like, you know, all these kind of things. Or you could be like, hey, I feel like this. And it's like, and it also shows. And so there's so many like beautiful like ways of like, you know, just kind of like getting into it, and like, you know, how it does, like, I feel like with every project too, it's like art is also not like surface level, right? Where it's like when you're telling me about like these pictures that you took and how they were all like blurry, and you know, they had like a purpose of like exploring like your grandpa's journey of like, you know, him like, you know, not being able to like see, because it's like he didn't know that this was different than everyone else, you know? So it's like, so it's beautiful to be able to be in that kind of like, where it's like, oh, you think that it's not perfect, but it's like, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for like all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, and if you look underneath the surface, there's a whole entire story of like why it's not, you know? And I think that that's also like such a beautiful way of like, you know, being able to like almost like showcase like the process of like, hey, this is how I'm doing it, and this is how I choose to do it, and like we'll see where it takes us. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
And
no, totally.
Yeah.
And I've purposely on my Instagram, I'm terrible at posting. I'm trying to get better at it.
Yeah.
But when I started posting my art, I decided that I would leave it, you know, like even like the shitty stuff that I made like years ago, you know, I was like, I'm going to leave it because I think it's important to me. And this kind of dives into the community over competition that you have as one of your mottos that I really like resonate with it. But I think it's important to show that process. I think we were talking about this a little earlier, where sometimes you look at someone and you're like, wow, they're so successful, or they're living the life I want to live.
Exactly.
And you ask them like, how did you get here? And sometimes without deeper reflection, you don't actually know how to communicate how you got there.
Exactly.
You know, and I think that that's so important to make tangible and real for other people. Like, these are the like steps that I took, you know, and not leave it at this high level. Oh, well, you know, I kind of did this and I met this person and then
exactly, you know?
That struggle, and not just the struggle, but it's the finding, okay, this was a dead end, or I tried this and it really wasn't working for me. It like there's all of these steps that end up adding up. It's cumulative, right? Cumulative into becoming whatever your existence is now. So for example, I tried dance. I didn't think I was going to become a dancer, but I love to dance, and I was like, I'm going to go take some classes. Maybe I'll do this more often. And I tried different types like I was less comfortable doing. And I learned about myself, and I don't remember the exact details, but there was some, like, I think I was taking a hip hop dance class, and then later in the day I went to work, or later in the week, and for some reason that experience helped me solve a problem at work. I don't remember how exactly, but I just remember being like, whoa, it's so wild how things that feel completely different, like tech and dance, can come into an intersection where it helps me solve a problem, right? And I recently read this book called Range, and it's about how I think it's like the subtitle is like why generalists triumph in this specialized world. And it's about how we've come to a place where we feel like, okay, well, when you're in high school, you got to know what you want to do. Because then you're going to go to college and you're going to specialize in that thing, and then you're going to go off into the world and you're going to be that thing forever. Right?
Forever,
And we have gotten to this place where we're undervaluing trying lots of new things.
Exactly.
And it's not just the failure aspect of it, becoming comfortable with that we already talked about, but it's also the value of figuring out what it is that you enjoy doing, and having a better understanding of what all there is before you decide, if you want to decide, to have something that you dive in deeper.
Exactly.
You know? And I have found so much value in that. Like, I thought I wanted to draw and paint for a long time because that was the type of art that I had access to. And then I tried other things like film photography and ceramics. And now when I go back to drawing and painting, I'm like, whoa, actually, there's a lot more friction here for me to try to produce something than when I'm doing film photography or ceramics. Like there's less like of a challenge for me to just go like play, to explore, right? Than when I'm drawing and painting, like, okay, interesting, self-knowledge, this is helpful, right? You know, and same with like creating music, like I want to get better at this, but not enough that I'm going to invest in it, right? And like, okay, this is good to know, like I enjoy listening and dancing, but creating the music, you know, I'm not willing to put in the work for that, so, and that's okay. But you know, and I used to think that, you know, trying all of these different things would be a waste of time because I wasn't like going in and specializing immediately, right? And what I've learned is that all of those things give me, it's like having like an expanded library of references, right? And knowing enough about different things to be like, ooh, you know, as an artist or as a person, you know, but as an artist, I want to try combining ceramics and textiles, right? And actually I think one of the first projects that I showed you was around that, right? And you know, like, okay, I'm gonna break these vessels and then I want to sew them back together. And then, you know, I tried doing it with thread and I was like, this thread is like not doing it for me, it's not keeping things together. Okay, well, what if I try wire? Oh, this is actually stronger. Okay, but I really want to go back to the thread, so how do I do this? Okay, well, what I learned in the first vessel that I broke and sewed back together is that if I use wire, it keeps everything tight together and it doesn't move. So what if I do that, and then the second time around I'll go back and like sew it with a thread and tighten it as much as I can, because it'll already be in place, and again, getting to know different materials, different paths, and like all of that ends up adding up into just having more information to create newer, maybe not even necessarily new and unique things, because that's hard to do, but it just presents a new perspective, again, a new angle, a new approach, at the very least for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, it's like those theories, right? Where you're like, ooh, I already understand that it does this and it does that. And, and I feel like those are, they're that exploration phase, right? Where you're just kind of like, hey, if what I do this is what happens or whatever. And it's like, well, like same, right? With like life, like, hey, if I end up doing this is like what could be the possible income, but also outcome, and like this is what could happen, all these kind of things. And so it's like really kind of like seeing it in that kind of way, where you're like, wow, if I do this, like the problem solving that you did from like taking dance and like something creative and movement and all that kind of stuff to implementing it into something that you're like, wait, how do these coincide, like, or how, like, my two worlds just clash, like this is cool, so it's awesome that we could have that, where it's like one of them is helping the other one, and like that growth, where it's like, you're right, like that kind of like that society standard, right, where it's like I get to have interns in the studio, and a lot of the times, they're high school students, but it's like, but also when I teach at arts, it's like they're also like high school students. And so, just kind of like, hey, so what are you going to do after high school? And then they're like, well, I want to go into, and so they start to tell me like, do you already know what you want to do? Like, and I always started off by like, I know it's a loaded question, but it's like, do you have an idea? And then they're like, well, and so then I'm like, oh, and, you start to kind of understand that it's like we're putting a lot of pressure, right? Like a lot of pressure on like kids, because they're kids. Yeah, just because they turn
fully developed. Yeah, like just 28.
Yeah, just because they're like 18, it doesn't make them like, it makes them a legal adult, but they're still kids. Yeah, and so we're putting so much pressure, right? Where it's like you're already gonna know what you want to do for the rest of your life, and that's like so scary, like, and it's so like permanent, it
feels that way.
And like I'm down for tattoos, and I'm down to have like permanent shit, but it's like I don't want to have like a permanent like
outlook on your life, exactly, and definition of who you are.
And like, and so I think that that's like, especially because we're so complex, right, where it's like we're not just like, this is what's gonna be the rest of my life. Like, how freaking boring is that, to just kind of be like, this is like the rest of my life. And you're like, okay, cool. But like, there has to be that exploration phase of like, hey, you know what? Like, I've never, like, I actually want to like run a marathon.
I can't tell if you're making an example or if you're telling me a dream.
Like, I actually would like to, you should do it. But I have to train, Yeah. But yeah, I'm down to do
work.
it.
There's work.
And and so for me, at least like a 5-mile one, where it's like it's small, and
start with the 5K.
Yeah, and like I would just want to try it and do it and just kind of like see what that is, and just kind of being like, I did that, because it's like, it's not, I feel like it's a goal outside of like, this identity that I created, where it's like, I'm also trying to like find myself, outside of like this identity that I created, because it's like, as much as I love being like the weird fucking sewing person, like there's also another person that
there's more to you,
and, I think that like, I've been really asking myself that question, right? Like, who am I outside of like, like being so loca and like the studio and all that, and kind of like exploring that. I'm like, oh, like, would I want to do these things? And like, there is fear attached to like some of the things that I want to do, where it's like, you're just kind of like, oh damn. And like, I feel like moving to San Diego was like such a beautiful like experience and like blessing, and like a lot of growth happened to me, like in being, I feel like I actually grew up as like I grew as like a person, you know, like I grew up like here, you know,
You're a
where
real
it's like
adult now.
I'm like, I actually became an adult in San Diego, you know, even though like I think I was like maybe like 24 when I moved here. So I was technically an adult already, but it's like I feel like there was a lot of like growth, you know, where it's like I learned how to communicate, and like I learned, you know, how to be a little bit more independent, because it's like I grew up with a lot of people in my house all the time, and I never had the opportunity to be alone, right? And I never wanted that opportunity to be alone. Like I actually feared being alone and going to places by myself. And so I feel like, you know, I last week I was like, you know, I want to do something on my day off, you know, and I was like, all right, what do you want to do? You know, and I was like, I want to do something that I want to do. And I was like, all right, what do you want to do? And then you're like, you should go and get some thread.
No.
And I went and I got thread, and I was like, what? Like, and I was,
it's almost like you were like, I'm going to do something out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And then you're like,
and so,
or I can do this thing that I'm comfortable with.
and it was like so uncomfortable too, because it's like I went by myself, you know, and and which I usually like I don't, you know, I usually have like Manny with me, or I'll be like, come on, Ice, we gotta go do this thing, and she'll be like, okay, and you know, and so she's like there. But I went by myself, and as soon as I walked in, like I was just like, it was like a small place, and so as soon as I walked in, they're like, I like your pants, and I was like, you know, there was like 3 people there, and I was like, oh, thank you, and I was just like so like just overwhelmed by like, you know, and I was like, oh, thank you, and then like I almost didn't know, like,
I need to go hide.
I was like, wait, what this isn't like my, oh shit, this isn't the studio, where, you know, and you're just like, where's the thread here, and you're just like, fuck, you know. So it was very overwhelming for me, and so I go to the thread, and I'm like, don't be weird. And so I'm in, and I get all the thread, and I'm like, you know, and I'm like trying to pretend like I'm looking at like all the other fabric, but I'm like, this isn't recycled fabric, you can't have any. And so then I just get my threads, and I'm like, you know, the lady, she's like, she keeps asking me, she's like, you want a bag? And I was like, no, I got one in the car. And she's like, are you sure you don't want a bag? All these threads, they're just going to roll around in your car. And I was like, I got a bag. And she's like, are you, and she kept, you know, and I was like, I'm okay. And, you know, on the way home, I was like, I like discovered that they had opened up a new coffee shop right there. And I was like, I should stop. And then I was like, you work so hard, you know, I have like these little like little voices. You work so hard. You deserve like a coffee, and you're by yourself, like, and you're thirsty. And, you know, trying to justify the reasons why I should have a cup of coffee, you know. And so I'm like, you're right. So I like turned around, and I'm like, and then I'm like, oh, I can't go in through that way. Okay. So then I'm like, all right. Cause you know, you wanna be like a good legal driver. So I'm like trying to figure out how to get into like this drive through, you know, and I'm like, and I get to like this, like what I call the fork in the road, right? And so I'm like, okay, if you make a left, you could go and get coffee, but if you make a right,
you can go home and
you
be in your
just
pajamas.
you just go home, you know. And every part of like my mind was like, you know what? That was like such an overwhelming experience, just going to like get thread and like just like all of that, like, you know, where it's like,
do I really want to encounter
new
people in a new place to get coffee?
And
what
I
if
was
it's not
like,
even good? And then you start doing the opposite. You unhype yourself.
Exactly. And I was like, oh, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, that seemed like a lot already. And I just, it was so, you know, it was nice. I liked the compliment of like, they put a lot of, you know, time and effort into like, you know, basically telling me that my pants were nice, and I appreciated it. But it's like at the same time, I was like, just so like so thrown off. I was like, oh my God, you know, I don't know how to take a compliment. But it was like just so, you know, that I was like, and so I ended up going home, you know, and I didn't get a cup of coffee, and it just, it fucking haunts me, you know, to just think about that. And I like it. I like that it's this thing of like, that it's forcing me to basically be like, you have to look at that, and you have to look at it, and you have to be aware that you you're regressing, where it's like, I feel like, you know, before, like, I was like, yay, I get to be by myself, you know, and like now I'm like, oh my God, how could I go to like this place by myself, and like, you know, I don't have like the comfort of like someone else to basically be like, oh my God,
I'm cool.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not a
yeah.
loner.
I'm not like alone here, you know. And so for me, like, that was like something that took me a really long time to like break out of. And it was basically out of necessity, because I was just here, me and Manny, by ourselves, you know, until ICE came along. And so I feel like I don't want to be that person that is like so scared to be like out by themselves, you know, which seems like such a kiddish.
No, I get you.
You know?
No, I have similar feelings, and I'm learning that about myself too.
Yeah.
Who I want to be, and what it's gonna take to get there, and if I'm okay with that, whatever that price is. Like, I think when I moved to Seattle, I didn't want to move there. I actually had plans like, all right, I'm going to be there. I'm going to work for a year or two, pay off all my student loans, and get the fuck out and become a teacher and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Back in Southern California. And I didn't do that, as you know. I stayed there like 6 years, and then the pandemic, and I moved down here again. But I don't know. I lost a lot of confidence when I went over there. You know, I remember... I mean, I'm sure that I already had these feelings. It just wasn't something I had time to notice during university. But I've stopped being excited to try something new. I struggled to make close friends right away, partially because I was like, well, I'm going to leave anyway, so why am I going to form connections that are going to be sad to leave? So part of it's on me. But then when I started trying, I was like, this is really hard to meet new people when you're not going to school with them.
Yeah.
You don't have, or you don't work with them. But I wanted to meet people that were not from work, that liked things I liked, because I was not a gamer, and I didn't care that much about anime and board games and things. And I was like, I love live music, and I love to dance salsa. And, you know, I want to talk about books and, you know, have like in-depth conversations about things that are not work related. And I really struggled to find that. But even before that, I struggled to get myself out, you know, and I would always justify it with, oh, it's cold and rainy, but that's Seattle. You know, and but it was really challenging to get myself out and doing things and being okay with the discomfort of, you know, going alone or going to spaces where I didn't know anybody, where I didn't know how it was going to go. And since then, I have learned a lot more about myself through, again, like pushing myself. But part of it was going to therapy for a little while. That therapist and I didn't work out, but I appreciate her because she taught me a few things that have helped me make growth personally, and I hope to find a new therapist soon. But, you know, she taught me about this thing called exposure therapy, which is where, like, you identify what is the thing that you're afraid of, and then you go and do that thing, or at least like a small version of it, and then you're like, oh, okay, I tried it. And then you go and try it again, like the next week or the next day or whatever, right? And so I totally get what you're saying about, you know, going to a bar alone, for example. And I'm more okay with that now because I've traveled alone a lot. And so I'll be like, well, I'm not going to stay in this Airbnb. I'm here to experience the world, right? And change my perspective and become the person I want to be. And but then I'm like, oh, I'm so scared that, like, I don't know, I'm going to meet someone aggressive, or that I'm not going to be able to get out of a conversation with someone I don't want to talk to because they won't leave me alone. Or, you know, I don't know. And, you know, other dumb things that are not realistic. But I started finding ways of coping. So, for example, if I'm going to a bar or to like a lounge where they have live music playing, then if I'm going alone, I'll bring a book with me. And I'll sit at the bar and I'll read my book. You know, I'll read my book, and then when the event starts, I'm like, yeah, live music,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But sometimes I'll just go and have a drink and read my book or work on like a design for something, like a project that I want to make progress on. That okay, I'm having like a block because I'm in the same space all the time. Well, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do this. So I carry a book with me everywhere, or at least a journal, and one that keeps a lot of like guys who I don't want to talk to.
Exactly.
They're like, oh, she's reading, right?
Yeah.
Like, who
no
does
one wants
that?
a woman that reads. She
That's
reads.
fine with me. Yeah, but like, like it wards off a lot of people that I don't really want to talk to. And then, sometimes people will be like, oh, okay, like, oh, she's reading, cool. And then they might ask you like, oh, what are you reading? And whatever.
Yeah.
And then, maybe that leads to more interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Because you're starting from a place where, you have something to talk about.
Exactly.
And other times people just don't talk to you, and like I'm okay with that because I'm there for like to challenge myself to become more comfortable being in a place where I want to be without having someone going with me, like, oh, everybody's busy, well, I guess I'm not gonna go. I'm gonna go anyway. And if I need to bring my comfort book with me, I will bring my comfort book with me.
Your security blanket.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I
love that.
And that's its own, there's value in that.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to acknowledge that you're not comfortable going to the coffee shop by yourself right now. I think the challenge now is to push yourself, if you want to, right? Like I'm someone who wants to grow, and I know that I'm going to change over time, just like my art practice is changing over time, just like my careers are changing, and all of the things that I'm learning by making art of like, okay, this is not going to go well, or this is scary, it's new material, or whatever, that translates to these getting to know ourselves over and over time. I love it. Because as you're experiencing life and doing things, you're changing, right? And so it makes sense to me when, you approach a high schooler and they're like, I don't know what I want to do. Or like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a high school teacher and teach math and blah, 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 right? And then you talk to them 5-10 years later and they're doing something completely different. Or, they're once again in the, I don't know what I want to do with my life phase. And that to me makes sense.
For sure.
You have changed. Yeah. You're new.
Exactly.
And now and that's why I say, like, I don't know that you're regressing. Yeah. As you said it, like, I can see why you felt that way or feel that way. But I think it's almost like you're getting to know yourself again, or there's attention on another part of yourself that you haven't given attention to for a while, right? And
both.
Yeah, there you go. And now it's like, okay, am I ready to face this part of myself fully, and either accept that I'm just not the kind of person who wants to go to a coffee shop, and I want to do these other things instead. Or actually I really want to be someone who's down with that, you know, or maybe I'm not going to enjoy it after I find out, maybe I try it a lot of times, I'm like, I actually don't like this, so I'm going to stop trying to do this thing I don't like. But maybe you'll actually like it. And maybe you'll find something that gives you that peace when you go. That's true. Or that it becomes a time for reflection, or a time to read a book or a magazine or whatever, right, that you didn't have before.
That's true.
So it's almost like saying, well, what can this bring to my life?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
dude, this has been like such a beautiful conversation.
Yeah,
there's a lot of like, layers. There's like a lot of layers, Oh, I love that. Yes. But it's like, if someone did want to like scope you out, where could they find you?
So I'm trying to go to more art events now.
Yeah. But
honestly, the place that's not my home that I'm at most frequently is probably here in Logan.
Yeah.
Where I'm coming to like be like, oh, I wonder what Solaka's up to.
Cleaning.
Is her shop open? Oh yeah, right now you are.
I know, you're like,
but it's gonna be magical. I'm gonna miss
it'll be good. I know, me too. Me too. But I wish I could say that you could dance on that table, but you can't. It'll just kind of like, but
the new ones,
it'll be good.
They'll be like,
yeah, they'll be good. They'll be good. It's good. I'm excited for this change, you know, and just literal, but also
Literal
like
studio
inner,
change.
you know, and so it's
It'll
good.
be fresh.
But yeah,
It's gonna be good.
yeah.
Yeah.
But dude,
you're doing a lot of amazing things. I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to say that.
Thank
like,
you.
It's so inspiring. I haven't known you for very long.
Yeah.
But you've done a lot.
I
In the,
know.
Like, I don't know, 2 years that I've known you, I'm just like, wow, she's busy. Her and Manny are like hustling.
Remember you called me a joyful hustler?
A joyful hustler. Yeah, yeah. Honestly, that I think, I'm gonna tag on weird, joyful hustler to that.
That's a good one. That's a good one. You know?
I think,
but
but I don't know. I think this exploration that you started talking about, you know, wanting to like, oh, maybe I want to run a marathon. Start with a 5K.
Exactly.
And maybe I want to delve into gardening or whatever, right? Like, I think you should. I think
Yeah.
you should do it. I think you should
Yeah.
have, as the Artist's Way book would say, have art dates with yourself.
Yeah.
Where you're gonna go and just do something for you. You know. and
Exactly.
Be it
I wanna
a
do
coffee
that.
shop, be it going to a museum, be it going to volunteer at a local garden,
Yeah.
whatever.
All
you
of
know,
it.
like do all of it.
Yeah.
And do one each week.
Yeah.
That's my challenge to you.
Thank you. I'm
One
gonna
each
do
week.
that.
Mhm.
I'm gonna do it.
It can be small.
It could be small. Yeah.
I'm gonna
Thank
need
you, Gabby.
receipts though. Send me
I'm
a
gonna.
photo.
Yeah. I'll be like, look at where I'm at. And I look super anxious.
And I'll be like, you got this.
I'm by myself.
I'm like, you're
No.
doing great, babe. You're
Yeah,
doing great.
yeah. But dude, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having
and
me.
Yeah.
This was
And
great.
We'll talk soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't even make it weird. We didn't even make it weird.
That was like an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, no way.
Awesome. Yeah.
Oh, man.
But dude, you know what? Like, I think
And I
that
feel like we were like, oh, sorry if it was too over the
No, that was
all over
awesome.